How profit beat geopolitics in the AI race. Why 2025 marked the end of illusion about technology, power, and the state. Introduction. The year the mask came off. For years, artificial intelligence was framed as a civilizational contest, a race between nations, ideologies, and systems of governance. The dominant narrative, especially in Washington, was that AI would be the decisive terrain on which US supremacy would be preserved or lost. Semiconductors became the new oil. Algorithms became weapons, export controls became acts of war by other means, and then 2025 happened. What 2025 revealed brutally and unambiguously unambiguously was that AI is not governed by grand strategy, but by capital flows. And when the two collide, capital wins. The year didn't mark a US defeat in the AI race, it marked something more corrosive. The voluntary dilution of strategic advantage in exchange for profit, market stability, and profit convenience. And today I'm going to argue the events and talk about the events of 2025, demonstrate the five core truths about AI competition is not state led, it is farm led. Secondly, I would talk about export controls are tactical tools, not strategic solutions. Third, I will talk about the United States lack a credible endgame for AI parity with China. Furthermore, profit incentives have hollowed out techno nationalism from within. And lastly, I would talk about the global backlash against the US tech is not ideological, it is rational. Together, these forces explain why geopolitics didn't lose to profit. It was never really in control to begin with. Chapter 1. The Illusion of the AI Cold War. The AI race was sold as a replay of Cold War. Two blocks, two competing systems, zero sum outcomes. This framing was comforting because it suggested clarity, enemies, allies, red lines, victory conditions. But unlike nuclear weapons or aerospace in the 20th century, AI doesn't sit neatly inside national borders. Its supply chain is global, its talent is mobile, its capital is footloose, its commercial applications are vastly outweighing its military ones. The DeepSeek R1 movement in the early 2025 shattered the illusion that the United States could permanently bottleneck Chinese AI development through cheap controls alone. Whether or not DeepSeek truly rivaled OpenAI was beside the point. What mattered was perception. China demonstrated credibility, capability at lower cost and lower compute intensity. That single fact undermined the foundational assumption of US policy that compute scarcity could be weaponized indefinitely. Once that assumptions crack, the entire edifice of AI containment began to wobble. Point number two. Export controls, a blunt instrument masquerading as strategy. Export controls were never a long-term strategy, it was a delay tactic. They worked temporarily by constraining China's access to top-tier GPUs. The US bought time. But time for what, you may ask? That question was never answered. There was no serious plan for managing a future AI parity, establishing enforceable global safety regimes, integrating allies into a durable compute alliance, or transitioning from denial to regulation. Instead, US exports became a substitute for thinking. By 2025, the cost became visible. US firms lost access to their largest marginal market. Incentives grew for grey market diversions and domestic Chinese alternatives. Allies grew uneasy about the unilateral US choke points, and Chinese optimized around constraints rather than collapsing under them. When Trump administration reversed course and allowed Nvidia to sell advanced, not not top tier chips to China, though not top tier chips to China, it was not ideological betrayal. It was economic inevitability. You cannot ask publicly traded firms to sacrifice trillions in market capitalization indefinitely for abstract strategic goals that has no timeline, no victory condition, no compensation mechanism. States demand sacrifice and markets punish it. Chapter 3. The Tyranny of the Balance Sheet. By the end of 2025, the so-called Magnificent Seven comprised over a third of the S&P. The concentration was not a sign of strength, it was a systematic risk. AI was no longer a sector, it was the market. In that context, restricting Nvidia's sale to China was merely not only a foreign policy decision, it was a threat to pension funds, retirement accounts, index stability, political donor networks, and macroeconomic confidence. At that scale, national security arguments lose traction, not because they are wrong, but because they are too expensive. This is the structural truth few policymakers will say aloud. When a technology becomes systematically embedded in financial markets, it escapes state control. The US didn't choose profit over geopolitics. They discovered that geopolitics is already subordinated to capital. Point number 4. Techno-nationalism without the capacity to sustain it. As Washington hesitated, the rest of the world drew conclusions. US governments in Europe, the South, the global South, parts of Asia realized they were exposed, too dependent on US platforms, as well as too vulnerable to US sanctions, too subject to political winds in Washington. This all created a sense of uneasy in their allies as much as it created an uneasy amongst its foes. The response was not anti-American ideology, it was self-insurance. This is why 2025 saw a surge in data localization laws, national IT strategies focused on good enough models, regulatory pressure on US platforms, investment in US compute sovereignty. The irony is sharp. US techno-nationalism triggered global techno-nationalism, but without coalition building needed to sustain, but without the coalition building needed to sustain leadership, you cannot lead an ecosystem you don't trust, and you cannot demand trust while weaponizing dependence. Thus, US soft power didn't collapse through confrontation, it eroded through inconsistency. Chapter 5. The bubble problem no one wants to confront. By late 2025, another fear loomed: overinvestment. AI infrastructure spending is projected to reach 2.8 trillion by 2029, yet meaningful productive gains remain uneven, concentrated, and uncertain. Much of the investment is defensive, firms afraid not to invest rather than confident of returns. This creates a paradox: AI is too big to fail, but too inefficient to justify its valuation narratives. In such an environment, restrictions become dangerous. Any policy that threatens revenue stream risks triggering a correction. Thus, Washington's reversal on cheap sales can also be read as bubble management. The state steps in, not to discipline capital, but to stabilize it. This is not leadership, this is accommodation. Chapter 6: The Death of the Tech Messiah Myth. Perhaps the most lasting consequence of 2025 is reputational. For decades, US tech companies were seen as innovators, problem solvers, agents of modernization. By 2025, they are increasingly viewed as extractive monopolies, political actors, regulatory liabilities. When tech occupies the same moral category as big oil or big tobacco company does, its geopolitical utility collapses. Governments stop defending it reflexively. Citizens stop trusting it instinctively. This matters because soft power is leverage, and leverage is cheaper than coercion. The US didn't trade chips for profit, it traded credibility. Chapter 7: The Deeper Structural Lesson. The events of 2025 revealed a larger truth about modern power. States no longer fully control the technologies that define their strategic position. AI is not like nuclear weapons. It is not even like aerospace. It is closer to finance, networked, privatized, speculative, and globally entangled. In such systems, strategy is constrained by markets, sovereignty is negotiated, not asserted, and dominance is temporary, unless institutionalized. And the United States failed because it lacked technology. The United States failed not because it lacked technology, but because it lacked a coherent theory of power under conditions of capital dominance. Conclusion: not defeat but exposure. 2025 was not the year the US lost the air race. It was the year the race was revealed to the misframed. This was not a contest between Washington and Beijing. It was a contest between states and the economic systems that they created, and no longer fully controlled. Profit didn't bear geopolitics. Profit absorbed geopolitics. For those watching closely, the lesson is stark and unforgiving. Power today belongs to those who control incentives, not rhetoric. Systems rot not from opposition but from internal contradictions. Empires do not fall when they are challenged, but they start selling their advantages to stay comfortable. This is the real story of the AI race in 2025.